At just after 5 in the morning on February 12, 1935, the upper fin tore off the USS Macon. She was the United States Navy's flying aircraft carrier, 785 feet long, with 4 fighter planes parked inside her belly. She began climbing into the dark, and nobody aboard could stop her. 20 minutes later, she settled gently into the Pacific. Of the 83 men aboard that night, 81 lived. Her sister ship had killed 73. The Navy had learned from that. Then it walked away from the idea entirely and never built another. The airship worked. So what exactly failed? She is still down there. In 1990, a research submersible working off the California coast found her about 1,500 feet below the surface, spread across the seabed in pieces, with 4 Curtiss Sparrowhawk fighters lying inside the wreckage where the hangar used to be. Their wings are folded, the paint is gone, but the aircraft are recognizable, and they are exactly where they were parked when the fin came off. That image is the whole problem in one picture. 4 fighter planes, on the ocean floor, inside an airship. Start with what the thing actually was, because most people have never seen one and the scale doesn't translate through photographs. The Macon and her older sister, the Akron, were rigid airships, not blimps. A blimp is a bag that holds its shape because the gas inside is pushing outward. A rigid airship is a metal skeleton, a frame of duralumin girders and rings, covered in fabric, with separate gas cells sitting inside the frame like balloons in a cage. That structure is why the ship can be big. And these were big. 785 feet from nose to tail. That is roughly 3 American football fields. It is longer than most warships of the era, and it was flying. Inside the hull, well back from the nose, was a compartment about 60 feet long with a T-shaped opening cut into the bottom of the ship. That was the hangar. Below it, on a retractable steel arm, hung a trapeze. Here is where people usually assume they have misunderstood something. They had not. A fighter pilot flew up underneath a moving airship, matched its speed, and drove a hook mounted above his upper wing into that trapeze bar. When the hook locked, he cut his engine. The crew winched him up through the hole in the belly, swung him onto a rail, and parked him. Then they sent the trapeze back down for the next one. Reverse the process to launch. The obvious question is why anyone would want to do this. Not how. Why? An airship is enormous, slow, and made mostly of gas. A fighter plane is small and fast and needs almost nothing except a runway. Bolting the two together sounds like a stunt, and if you saw it at an air show in 1933, you would have been forgiven for thinking that is exactly what it was. It wasn't a stunt, it was an answer to a genuinely hard problem. And to understand why serious men committed roughly $8 million Depression-era dollars to it, you have to look at the ocean the way the United States Navy was looking at it in the 1920s. The Navy expected that its next major war would be fought against Japan, across the Pacific. It was formal planning, and it had a version number. The problem with the Pacific is that it is preposterously large and at the time essentially blank. There was no radar, no satellites. If you wanted to know where an enemy fleet was, someone had to physically go and look, then get the information back to you while it was still true. A cruiser can look. A cruiser moves at maybe 20 knots and sees to the horizon, which from a ship's mast is not very far. A scout plane launched from a cruiser can see further, but it has to come back and land on the water, and its range is short. Do the arithmetic across millions of square miles of empty water, and you arrive at an unpleasant conclusion. The fleet could be blind for days, and blindness in a naval war is not an inconvenience. It is how you lose. Now put an airship into that problem. It flies at around 75 miles an hour, which is slow for an aircraft and enormously fast for anything floating on the sea. It can stay up for days without landing. It flies high, so it sees an immense circle of ocean at once. It can carry radios powerful enough to talk to the fleet from hundreds of miles away. On paper, it is very difficult to argue with. And the man making the argument was not a crank. Rear Admiral William Moffett ran the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics from its creation in 1921. He was the reason naval aviation had a budget, a career path, and political protection during a decade when Congress wanted to spend money on almost nothing. He believed in the airship specifically, and he was willing to burn his own credibility on it. That matters, because the usual story about doomed aircraft is that some fool pushed a bad idea through. This was the opposite. The most effective aviation advocate in the United States Navy looked at the Pacific problem and concluded that the long-range rigid airship was the solution. Except there was a hole in the argument, and Moffett's people knew about it before the ships were built. The airship is a wonderful place to see from. It is a terrible thing to be seen in. It is the single most visible object that has ever flown. Send it out alone to find an enemy fleet, and the enemy fleet will find it first, from a very long way off, and then it is a slow, gas-filled target with nowhere to hide. The fix is the part that still sounds like science fiction, and it is genuinely clever. Stop treating the airship as the scout. Make it the base. If the ship carries her own aircraft, she never has to go near the enemy. She sits far back, out of sight, and throws small, fast fighters out in a fan across hundreds of miles of ocean. They do the looking. They come back, hook on, refuel, and go out again. One airship plus 4 or 5 aircraft does not search a circle. It searches a band of ocean that no cruiser division could cover in a week. And because the fighters can be recovered and relaunched in the air, the airship never needs a runway, a carrier deck, or calm water. The men who flew those fighters understood the joke in their own job description. Their unit insignia was a circus performer swinging from a trapeze. Was any of this demonstrated, or was it a slide deck? It was demonstrated, and earlier than you would guess. The British hung a Sopwith camel under an airship and released it in 1918. The US Army played with a small biplane and a non-rigid airship in the middle of the 1920s. And in the summer of 1929, from the older airship Los Angeles, a Navy lieutenant flew a Vought biplane up to a trapeze, hooked on, hung there, and dropped away again. The proof of concept was in hand before the Akron's frame was finished. The construction contract went to Goodyear Zeppelin in 1928 for 2 ships. The chief engineer was Carl Arnstein, who had come from the actual Zeppelin company in Germany and knew more about rigid airship structures than almost anyone alive. Goodyear built a hangar in Akron, Ohio to assemble them in, and the hangar itself became a minor wonder of the world, a clear interior span so large that fog occasionally formed inside it. Then came the piece of national good luck that made the whole American program look safer than anything the Germans were doing. Helium. Every European rigid airship was filled with hydrogen, which lifts beautifully and burns catastrophically. The United States controlled essentially the world's only meaningful supply of helium, which does not burn at all. Congress had already banned exporting it, so the Akron and Macon flew on a gas that could not catch fire, in an era when the public's entire mental image of airship disaster was fire. Remember that. It comes back, and not in the way you would expect. The Akron flew for the first time in September 1931 and was commissioned that October. 8 engines buried inside the hull, driving propellers on outriggers that could be swiveled to push the ship up or down or straight ahead. Crew quarters, a galley, a radio room, all inside the hull, and the hangar and the trapeze, and eventually the Sparrowhawks, tiny Curtiss biplanes, a little over 20 feet long, fast for their size, with a hook above the top wing. Fewer than 10 were ever built. They were designed to do one job, and outside an airship they were not much use, which is a detail worth holding on to. Here's the part of the story that people expect to go wrong and doesn't. The hook-ons worked. Not once, for the cameras. Routinely. Pilots learned it, got good at it, and then got casual about it. They practiced in poor visibility. They flew off with the wheels removed entirely, replaced by a fuel tank, because if you are never going to land on the ground, there is no reason to carry landing gear through the sky. That change bought them speed and range, which is exactly the trait a scouting aircraft wants. The engineering question, does this work, got answered early, and it got answered yes. So the trapeze is not the villain here. Whatever killed this program, it was not the part that looked impossible. The trouble started somewhere much more boring, and it started early. In February 1932, while the Akron was being walked out of her hangar at Lakehurst, the lower fin caught and was damaged. Nobody was hurt. It was a handling accident, the kind of thing that gets written up and repaired, but it established a pattern that nobody read as a pattern yet. On these ships, it was the fins that got hurt. 3 months later, in May 1932, the Akron came west to Camp Kearney, near San Diego, to moor in the open. The ground handling party was largely made up of sailors who had never done this before. An open-air mooring of a 785-foot airship is not a job you learn from a pamphlet. The ship rose unexpectedly while men were still holding her lines. Most of them let go in time. 3 did not. 2 of them fell. The third, an experienced rigger, wrapped himself in the line and hung there in the air for something close to 2 hours while the crew tried to work out how to get him aboard. And eventually they hauled him in alive. A newsreel camera recorded all of it. That footage went into cinemas across the country. For an enormous number of Americans, it was the first thing they ever saw the Navy's new airship do. Not the trapeze, not the fighters, men falling. The Navy's own conclusion was reasonable, and as far as it went, correct. This was a ground handling failure, not an engineering failure. Better training, better procedures, better moorings. The ship herself was sound and the concept was intact. 11 months later, the Akron went out over the Atlantic in bad weather with the chief of the Bureau of Aeronautics aboard. The night of April 3rd, 1933, the Akron left Lakehurst around 7:30 in the evening, heading east toward the New England coast to help calibrate radio direction finding stations. 76 men were aboard. Among them was William Moffett. The weather was bad and got worse. Lightning ahead, then all around. The ship pushed into a violent storm system off the New Jersey coast, and shortly after midnight she began to descend rapidly. The crew got her back up. Then she dropped again, hard, and this time the lower fin struck the water. She came apart in the sea in a matter of minutes. 73 men died. It remains the deadliest airship accident in history, worse in human terms than the Hindenburg by a wide margin, and almost nobody outside aviation history knows the name. Now, here is the detail that reorganizes everything you have been told about helium. The Akron did not burn. There was no fireball, no torch in the sky, nothing resembling the newsreel footage that would horrify the world 4 years later at Lakehurst. The gas that could not catch fire did exactly what it was advertised to do, and it made almost no difference, because the men did not die of fire. They died in the water. It was a cold Atlantic night in April. The Akron carried no life jackets for her crew. She carried a single rubber raft. Of the 76 aboard, 3 were pulled out alive, and one of those died shortly afterward. It is one of the cleanest examples in aviation history of solving the wrong problem brilliantly. The entire American airship program was built around an advantage over the Germans. Our ships cannot burn. That advantage was real. It was also irrelevant to the way an American airship was most likely to kill you, which was by putting you in the ocean at night, hundreds of miles from anyone, with nothing to float on. The Navy fixed it immediately. Life jackets, a raft for every 10 men, better emergency procedures. The correction was fast, and it was right, and it would, in due course, save nearly everybody aboard the Macon. But the Akron took something with her that could not be replaced by procedure. Moffett was the program. He was not merely a supporter. He was the man who could walk into a congressional hearing during a depression and come out with money for naval aviation. He had spent a decade building the political architecture that let the airship exist inside a Navy that was not naturally sympathetic to it. When the Akron went into the sea, the flying aircraft carrier lost the one person capable of protecting it from everyone who thought it was a waste of money. 2 days after the Akron's loss, a Navy blimp searching the wreck area crashed and killed 2 more men. That is the kind of week it was. And the Macon, her sister, was almost finished. She flew for the first time on April 21st, 1933, 18 days after the Akron went down. Commissioned in June, assigned to the Pacific, based at a new station at Sunnyvale, California, in a hangar so vast it is still one of the largest freestanding structures ever built. You would expect the program to be in mourning and paralysis. Instead, this is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the Macon was better than her sister, and the people flying her knew what they were doing. She was lighter, having benefited from what Goodyear learned building the first one. She carried her Sparrowhawks properly from the beginning, and in July 1934, she got a commanding officer named Herbert Wiley, who had one qualification nobody else had. He had been aboard the Akron when she went into the Atlantic, and he had lived. Under Wiley, the Macon started doing the thing the concept had always promised, and the moment it clicked is one of the strangest stories in the interwar Navy. In July 1934, President Franklin Roosevelt was crossing the Pacific aboard the heavy cruiser USS Houston. The Macon went looking for him. No radar, no position report she was entitled to rely on. A cruiser is a very small object on an ocean that size. She launched her Sparrowhawks, spread them out, and found the Houston. Then, because the crew had a sense of theater, they delivered the president's mail by parachuting it onto the cruiser's deck, packed in bundles with the day's magazines. That is precisely, exactly the mission. Find a specific warship in open ocean with no assistance. The Macon did it and demonstrated a communications reach nothing else in the fleet possessed. If you are keeping a mental scorecard of the concept, this is the moment where it stops being a promise. Roosevelt was, by contemporary accounts, delighted. His senior admirals were not, and this is where the story turns in a way that has nothing to do with engineering. The stunt had been performed without authorization on an operation the Navy considered sensitive, and the reaction from above was not congratulation. It was a reprimand. The most convincing demonstration the Macon ever staged was read in Washington as a publicity trick by a crew showing off. That sounds like a victory. It wasn't, and it points at the real disease, which had been growing quietly underneath the whole program. Everyone agreed the airship could see. Nobody had settled what she was for. Watch what happened in fleet exercises, because this is the evidence that matters more than any accident. Repeatedly, the Macon was assigned to war games, and repeatedly, she was ruled destroyed. Not because she was fragile, because of how she was being used. The exercises kept sending the airship toward the enemy. She would be positioned as a scout in her own right, pushed forward into the search area, and of course, she was spotted, because she was the largest object anyone had ever tried to hide. Umpires marked her as lost. Officers wrote reports observing that the airship was extraordinarily vulnerable in combat conditions, which was true, and which entirely missed the point, because that was the exact problem the fighters existed to solve. The Sparrowhawks were the ship's eyes. The ship was supposed to sit 200 or 300 miles back, where nobody could see her, and let the small aircraft do the exposing. Instead, the Navy kept flying the base into the battle, and then concluding the base did not work. Why would they do that? Not stupidity. The airship arrived in a fleet that had no doctrinal slot for it. Surface officers understood scouting cruisers. Carrier officers understood carrier air groups. The airship belonged to neither community. Its most powerful advocate was dead, and the tactics for using it properly had to be invented from scratch by the handful of men actually flying it. Institutions do not readily invent new categories for expensive things they did not ask for. Wiley understood the problem exactly. By late 1934 and into 1935, he was pushing hard to demonstrate standoff scouting, keeping the Macon back and working through her aircraft. In the exercises where she was allowed to operate that way, she performed well. The trouble is that the earlier scorecards were already written, and in a service deciding how to spend scarce depression money, the paperwork gets there before the nuance does. There is one more thread from 1934 that everyone in this story either forgot or filed for later, and it is the thread that eventually kills her. In April 1934, the Macon was flying over Texas and hit turbulence. Hard. The gusts damaged the structure where the upper fin attached to the hull, buckling girders in the ring the fin was fastened to. She got home. The damage was inspected and found to be real. Goodyear worked out what needed to be done. The fin attachments needed reinforcing, all of them. The work was scheduled to be carried out progressively, fin by fin, during periods when the ship was in her hangar anyway, because taking the Navy's only rigid airship out of service for a long refit was not something anyone wanted to do when the program was already fighting for its existence. 3 fins were done. The 4th was the upper one, the one that had been damaged over Texas. It was scheduled for the next overhaul. On February 11th, 1935, the Macon put to sea off the California coast to take part in exercises. Wiley had a point to prove about how the ship should be used, and by all accounts the exercise was going well. She was heading home up the coast in the early hours of the 12th, off Point Sur, when she flew into a storm. The gust hit her from the side at around 5:15 in the morning. It was not extraordinary weather. It was the kind of thing an airship on that coast could expect to meet several times a year, and the Macon had met worse. The upper fin failed. It tore away from the hull, and as it went, it ripped open the gas cells behind it. 3 of them started venting helium into the sky. The ship immediately went heavy at the stern and started sinking by the tail. What the crew did next was correct, and it was also the thing that doomed her. To arrest the descent, they dropped ballast, hard. Water tanks, anything droppable. The stern came up. So did everything else, and the Macon began to climb. She went up past 3,000 feet, past 4. She reached roughly 4,900 feet, and that number matters, because it was well above her pressure height. The altitude at which the helium inside expands enough that the cells have to vent it overboard or burst. She was already leaking from 3 ruptured cells. Now the rest of them were automatically dumping gas because of the altitude. She had emptied herself. Everything that had been holding her up was gone into the sky above Point Sur, and there was no way to get it back. The Macon came down slowly over the next 20 minutes, tail first, and settled onto the Pacific. And then the thing that made the difference happened, and it was not clever engineering. Wiley had life jackets aboard. He had rafts. He had drilled his crew on ditching. because he was a man who had been in the water off New Jersey 2 years earlier and had not forgotten it. The ship stayed afloat long enough for the men to get out and get clear. Of the 83 aboard, 81 survived. 2 died, a crewman who went back inside the ship, and a mess attendant who jumped early and swam for it. That is a genuinely remarkable outcome. A 785-foot airship comes apart in a storm at sea, and almost everyone walks away. Every correction the Navy made after the Akron worked exactly as intended. It bought the program nothing at all. The Macon was the last rigid airship the United States Navy ever operated. No replacement was ordered. Nobody proposed building a third. The concept did not go into review or await funding. It simply stopped. And it stopped so completely that within a few years the Navy's expertise in the entire technology had evaporated. So we are back at the question, and now there is enough evidence on the table to actually answer it. Take the explanations one at a time, because several of them are attractive and most of them are incomplete. Was it the weather, the fragility, the structure? This is the one everyone reaches for, and it has real support. Both ships were lost to storms, and in both cases, a fin was involved. But the Macon's fin failure was not a mystery of unknown physics. It was a documented, identified, understood weakness with an engineering fix already designed. 3 of the 4 fins had been reinforced. The one that failed was the one still waiting for its turn. That is not an unsolvable structural problem. That is a repair that did not happen in time, and a decision to keep a scarce asset flying rather than take it out of service. Was it the loss of Moffett? Closer, and genuinely important. Without him, the program had no advocate who could win an argument in Washington. But programs survive the death of their champions when the institution actually wants them. The Navy did not lose the airship because Moffett died. Moffett's death revealed how little support existed underneath him. Was it money? The depression? The competing claims on a small budget? Partly. Rigid airships were enormously expensive, and $8 million in 1933 bought a great deal of something else. But the Navy found money in those same years for carriers, for aircraft, for a substantial building program. Cost is a filter, not a verdict. Things get funded when the service is convinced they are necessary. Which brings you to the answer, and it is not really about airships at all. The Macon proved she could find a warship in the open Pacific. She never proved she was the best way to do it, because the alternatives were not standing still. Look at what was happening in the same years. The Navy was commissioning fleet carriers, Ranger in 1934, Yorktown and Enterprise laid down and coming, and each one carried dozens of aircraft that could scout and then also fight, bomb, and defend the fleet. At the same time, the long-range patrol flying boat was maturing fast. The PBY Catalina, first flown in 1935, could search enormous distances, operate from a tender or a sheltered bay almost anywhere, and be built by the hundreds. Eventually, it was built by the thousands. Now do the comparison the way an admiral with a fixed budget would have done it. The airship searched a wider band of ocean in one sortie than any single aircraft. That was true, and nobody disputed it. But the carrier and the flying boat had something the airship could never acquire, and it was not performance. It was multiplication. Every additional Catalina made the next one cheaper and easier. Pilots trained on a type that hundreds of other pilots flew. Mechanics learned an engine installation used across the fleet. Spare parts sat in depots that already stocked them. Tenders and bases already knew how to service them. Lose one, and you have lost one of many. The system that supported the flying boat got stronger with every unit delivered. The airship had none of that, and could not get it. There were 2 hulls, ever. Each one took years to build in a hangar purpose-built for it, by a workforce that existed nowhere else in America. There was one operating base of consequence, one crew community, one specialist trade, and the Sparrowhawk, remember those fewer than 10 aircraft, could not be used for anything else, because a fighter with no landing gear and a hook above its wing is useful in precisely one situation. That is the trap. Every rigid airship was a bespoke object. Losing one did not cost the Navy an aircraft. It cost the Navy half of everything it had, plus the crew, plus a substantial fraction of the nation's accumulated knowledge about how to operate the type. When the Macon went down, the Navy did not lose a ship. It lost the category. And that is the deeper reason the war game verdicts mattered so much. If you have 400 flying boats, an umpire ruling that one of them was destroyed is a data point. If you have one airship, an umpire ruling that it was destroyed is a strategic conclusion. The Macon was being asked to prove her survivability in a way no other scouting asset had to, because she was irreplaceable in a way no other asset was. There is a claim, made then and repeated since, that the airship was killed by a hostile establishment of battleship and carrier officers who never wanted it. There is something in it. The reprimand after the Houston intercept is real. The doctrinal misuse in exercises is documented, and it was genuinely unfair to the concept. Wiley and his officers were fighting to demonstrate standoff scouting against an institution that kept flying their base into the enemy's guns and then writing down that the base was vulnerable. But you do not need a conspiracy here, and reaching for one makes the history smaller than it is. No one had to suppress the flying aircraft carrier. It was competing against an entire industrial and operational system that got stronger every month while the airship stayed exactly as scarce, as hand-built, and as singular as it had been on the day it was launched. Separate what worked from what failed, because they are not the same thing, and this is where the story finally clicks. The trapeze worked. The hook-on worked so well it became routine, and pilots stripped the landing gear off their fighters because they were that confident in it. The parasite fighter concept worked. Airborne aircraft carriage, launch, and recovery was a solved problem in 1934. The airship as the carrier is what failed, not the idea of a flying base. The specific choice of a 785-foot helium-filled hull as the thing that would carry the aircraft. Too big to build in numbers, too visible to survive doctrinally, too scarce to ever be allowed to fail. Which is why the idea did not actually die. It just went looking for a different airframe. The Air Force spent the late 1940s hanging the tiny McDonnell XF-85 Goblin from a B-36 bomber, trying to give bombers their own escort fighters. The hook-on turned out to be much harder from a jet bomber than it had been from an airship, and the program failed. The FICON project put an RF-84 reconnaissance jet under a B-36 and actually reached operational service in the mid-1950s. And today the concept is entirely unremarkable. Aircraft launching and recovering unmanned aircraft in flight, mothership, and drone, which is the Macon's exact idea with the manned pilot removed and the problem of the hook-on solved by automation. Every one of those programs was chasing the same thing the Macon had already demonstrated with fabric, duralumin, and biplanes in 1934. The physical remains are scattered and easy to find, which is unusual for a program this thoroughly forgotten. At Moffett Field in California, Hangar 1 still stands, named for the admiral who died in the Akron, built to house an airship that never came back to it. It is enormous, empty, and visible from the freeway. In the National Air and Space Museum, there is a Sparrowhawk hanging from the ceiling, one of the few that survived, with the hook still mounted above its upper wing. And about 1,500 feet down off Point Sur, inside the broken hull, 4 more Sparrowhawks are still parked where the crew left them. The site is protected now. Remotely operated vehicles have been down to survey it several times, and the imagery is clear enough to read the wreckage. The fighters are still in the hangar. The carrier is on the seabed. The idea outlived them both.